They say power has a scent. For the kings and queens of France, that scent wasn't roses, gold, or divine perfume. It was something far more human. Beneath the layers of silk, jewels, and ceremony, the royal courts of France stank. Literally. The same monarchs who built the most beautiful palaces in Europe, who shaped fashion, art, and culture for centuries, lived in a world where disease, decay, and unwashed flesh were a part of daily life. Versailles may have sparkled in the sunlight, but behind its marble facades, the air was thick with rot, sweat, and filth. This is the story of how the French monarchy, arguably the most elegant in history, became infamous for its smell, and how that stench became a metaphor for the decay of royal power itself. It begins, ironically, with beauty. By the 17th century, France was the center of European sophistication. To be French was to be civilized, refined, superior. Every nobleman dreamed of serving at the court of the Sun King, Louis XIV. Versailles was not just a palace. It was a stage upon which the entire world performed. But there was a problem. It reeked. You see, when Louis XIV built Versailles, he created a masterpiece of architecture, but forgot one crucial detail: plumbing. The palace was an endless maze of gilded halls, marble staircases, and mirrored salons, but nowhere to relieve oneself in private. The result was chaos. There were over 1,000 courtiers living in the palace at any given time: nobles, servants, guards, musicians, cooks, and attendants. And they all had the same basic human need. With no proper toilets, they improvised. Behind tapestries, in stairwells, under staircases, even in fireplaces. Visitors complained that the stench in summer was unbearable. The marble floors were polished daily, but beneath them, the waste soaked into the foundations. The stables behind the palace added their own perfume, a mixture of dung, sweat, and hay that drifted through open windows into the royal apartments. And yet, amidst all this, the courtiers wore wigs powdered with lavender and rosewater. They doused themselves in perfume so heavily that the scent lingered in hallways long after they passed. Versailles became a place where people smelled like flowers, but the walls smelled like death. The king himself was no exception. Louis XIV bathed rarely, by his own admission, only a few times a year. Physicians at the time believed that water could spread disease through the pores of the skin. To stay healthy, one was supposed to keep clean by changing clothes frequently, not by washing. So the king's servants changed his linen shirts several times a day, and each fresh garment was considered a kind of dry bath. They were perfumed, pressed, and worn for mere hours before being replaced. But of course, linen cannot replace soap. The body underneath continued to sweat, itch, and reek beneath the lace and velvet. To mask the odor, Louis's court invented the modern perfume industry. Grasse, a small town in southern France, became the capital of scent, its factories distilling rose, jasmine, and orange blossom oils to supply the palace. Courtiers carried ornate bottles of perfume called vinaigrettes, filled with vinegar and herbs to sniff when the stench grew overwhelming. But no amount of perfume could cover everything. Louis XIV's personal hygiene, or lack thereof, became a subject of fascination. He suffered from chronic health problems that would horrify modern doctors. His mouth was riddled with abscesses and rotting teeth. Courtiers described the unbearable odor when he spoke. His barber surgeons drained pus from his jaw regularly. And yet, he still insisted on public meals known as the Grand Couvert, where nobles gathered to watch him eat. The aroma of spoiled food mixed with sweat and infection became a royal ritual. The irony was divine. The man who declared himself the Sun King shone brightly on the outside, but inside, his body was decomposing. Still, his court followed his example. Cleanliness was considered suspicious, something associated with peasants or foreigners. To smell of sweat or horse was the mark of nobility. A true gentleman or lady masked, but never washed, their scent. By the 18th century, the situation at Versailles had become absurd. The palace had grown into a city of nearly 10,000 residents. The ratio of bathrooms to people was roughly 1 to every 100. Even those few toilets, known as commodes à la Turque, were primitive, little more than wooden seats over buckets. Servants were supposed to empty them daily, but many didn't bother. The result? Buckets overflowed. Waste trickled down corridors and seeped into cracks in the marble floors. Visitors from abroad were shocked. One English diplomat wrote, "I have seen more filth in one day at Versailles than in a lifetime in London." Even the royal chapel wasn't spared. Priests complained that worshippers relieved themselves behind the pews during long masses. The courtyards, gardens, and fountains, all beautiful from afar, were in places open-air latrines. The perfume of roses mingled with the smell of urine and decay. Servants tried to keep up. Every morning, maids carried buckets of herbs, thyme, rosemary, and mint to scatter over the floors. They burned incense in golden censers, hoping to purify the air. But the scent of rot always returned. Versailles was not a palace, it was a gilded compost heap. Marie Antoinette arrived in this world of perfumed decay as a teenager. She came from Vienna, where the court of the Habsburgs was far more disciplined about hygiene. When she stepped into Versailles for the first time, she was horrified. She wrote to her mother that the palace was as beautiful as it is foul. But she adapted quickly. The queen built her own private domain, the Petit Trianon, where she attempted to live simply, meaning fewer courtiers and slightly less stench. She bathed in scented milk and rose water, an extravagance meant to evoke purity, but that quickly spoiled in the heat. The milk baths fermented, leaving a sour smell that clung to her skin. Her perfumer Jean-Louis Fargin created custom scents to mask the odors of the court: orange blossom, amber, violet, and musk. Each was more potent than the last, until entire rooms were saturated in floral fumes. Visitors often fainted from the intensity. Perfume had become both fashion and necessity. It wasn't just about smelling good, it was about surviving Versailles. Meanwhile, the royal physicians still preached the dangers of bathing. They claimed that water weakened the body and invited illness. Even when nobles did bathe, it was a public spectacle. The king's bath was a ritual attended by servants, doctors, and courtiers. Water was poured from silver ewers into marble basins, and the whole event was more theater than hygiene. The royal doctors prescribed dry cleaning rituals involving sponges soaked in spirits, or rubbing skin with linen cloths dipped in wine or vinegar. The goal wasn't cleanliness, it was odor management. Even cosmetics contributed to the stink. Courtiers coated their faces with white lead powder mixed with animal fat. In summer, it melted, releasing the smell of rancid grease. Wigs were powdered with starch scented with lavender, but that powder mixed with sweat, creating a sour, musty odor that clung to hair, hats, and clothing. And then there was the royal menagerie. Versailles wasn't just home to nobles, it was filled with animals. The royal stables housed over 2,000 horses. The kennels, falconries, and exotic animal pens added even more smells. Deer carcasses hung in the kitchens, fish rotted in barrels, and refuse from the feasts piled up faster than it could be removed. Servants carried the waste out to the fields each morning, but in summer, the air shimmered with flies. The grand palace of civilization was surrounded by a buzzing moat of filth. Yet, perhaps the most ironic part of this story is that the monarchy thought its perfume industry was proof of France's refinement. Perfume became a tool of power. It was said that the king's scent defined the nation. When Louis XV was crowned, his court became known as La Cour Parfumée, the perfumed court. He ordered that every room, every glove, and even the royal stationery be perfumed daily. The perfumers of Grasse grew rich, and the fragrance trade became one of France's greatest exports. But underneath the surface elegance, the physical reality of the monarchy's stench mirrored its moral decay. France was rotting from the inside. While nobles bathed in perfume, peasants bathed in mud. While courtiers powdered their wigs, farmers starved. The contrast became too strong to ignore. By the late 18th century, the smell of Versailles wasn't just a physical odor, it was symbolic. The palace reeked of everything the revolutionaries despised: corruption, decadence, and indifference. There's a famous story, perhaps apocryphal but too perfect to ignore, that when revolutionaries stormed Versailles in 1789, they said they could smell the rot before they saw it. They entered the gilded halls expecting divine beauty and found instead the stench of perfume and waste. The queen's bedchamber still carried the smell of spoiled milk from her baths. The fountains reeked of stagnant water. The golden mirrors reflected not divinity, but decay. The fall of the French monarchy wasn't just political, it was sensory. The people had lived with the smell of poverty their whole lives, but now they realized the kings and queens smelled just as bad, only richer. The divine right of kings dissolved in the air like cheap cologne. After the revolution, Versailles became a symbol of everything the new republic rejected. The palace was stripped, looted, and left to rot. For decades it stood empty, its marble cracked, its air finally cleared of incense and perfume. But the irony was complete. Even abandoned, it still stank. The years of waste soaked into the stone. Travelers in the 19th century wrote that the halls retained a faint, sweet, sour smell, like decaying flowers and musk. The ghost of the Bourbon monarchy still lingered, not in portraits or thrones, but in scent. Modern historians and archaeologists have even tried to reconstruct that smell. In 2013, a museum exhibition in Paris recreated the scents of Versailles, using historical recipes. Visitors described it as overwhelming, a mixture of sweat, rosewater, leather, and decay. One historian compared it to a funeral wrapped in flowers. It's easy to laugh at the past, to imagine the powdered nobles, the sweating courtiers, the reeking kings. But in a strange way, their obsession with perfume gave us something lasting. The French perfume industry still defines luxury today. Chanel, Dior, Guerlain, all descendants of that royal need to hide the smell of human frailty. Perfume born from rot. So, why did the French monarchy smell so bad? Because it was built on denial. The belief that appearances could erase reality, that roses could disguise rot, that divine power could conceal human decay. Versailles wasn't just a palace, it was a monument to the human desire to seem perfect even as everything underneath falls apart. When you walk its halls today, the mirrors still gleam, the fountains still glitter, the chandeliers still glow. But if you close your eyes and breathe deeply, you might imagine it, the faintest trace of the old world lingering in the air. The scent of power, the perfume of illusion, and beneath it, still, the ghost of something far less divine. The unmistakable smell of decay.